Jake Morrison was eating his lunch when the message arrived. He sat in the cafeteria of the space station Aurora, chewing on a piece of synthetic beef that tasted like cardboard. The spoon in his hand was nothing special, just standard military issue metal. He had no idea that this simple eating tool would soon change everything. The alarm bells started ringing across the station. Jake dropped his spoon and rushed to the command center along with everyone else. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood at the main screen, her face pale as she read the incoming transmission. "What is it, Captain?" Jake asked as he entered the room. "We got a message from the Zephyrian Collective," Rodriguez said. "They want to talk to us." Jake felt his stomach drop. The Zephyrian Collective was a group of 12 alien species that had been watching Earth for 10 years. They were powerful, advanced, and had never shown interest in direct contact before. When aliens who could destroy your planet suddenly wanted to chat, it usually meant trouble. Dr. Amy Carter, the station's science officer, was already working at her computer. "The message is being translated now," she said. "It's coming through." Clearly, the main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at an alien face. The creature had blue-green skin, 4 eyes, and tentacles where a human would have hair. When it spoke, the computer translated its words into English. "Greetings, humans of Earth," the alien said. "I am Ambassador Vextai of the Zephyrian Collective. We have watched your species for many years. You have shown promise, but you remain untested. We offer you a chance to prove yourselves." Jake exchanged looks with the other crew members. This sounded like the kind of offer that came with a big catch. The ambassador continued. "Every 50 years we hold the Grand Combat Simulation. It is a tournament where species from across the galaxy send their best warriors to compete. The winner gains access to advanced technology, favorable trade agreements, and respect throughout the known universe. And if we lose?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Then you remain as you are now. Isolated, primitive, and ignored by the greater galactic community." The screen showed images of the tournament. Massive arenas filled with alien spectators. Warriors from different worlds fighting with incredible skill and power. Some aliens were huge, others fast, and some seemed to glow with energy. "The tournament has special rules," the ambassador explained. "All advanced weapons are forbidden. No guns, no explosives, no energy blasters. Only melee weapons and improvised tools are allowed. We believe true warrior spirit can only be measured when technology is removed from the equation." Jake raised his hand. "What kind of opponents are we talking about?" The screen changed to show different alien species. "The Krillian warriors have natural armor and forearms with razor claws. The Nethran fighters can control gravity around their bodies. The Vorthan berserkers possess strength that can crush steel. Each species has evolved advantages that serve them well in close combat." Dr. Carter leaned forward. "And humans? What advantages do we have?" The ambassador's expression was hard to read, but Jake thought he saw something like amusement in those 4 eyes. "That remains to be seen. Your species is young and untested. Many in the collective believe you will be eliminated quickly." Captain Rodriguez stood up straighter. "When does this tournament take place?" "In 3 days. You have that long to choose your representative and prepare them for neural linkage. The simulation will feel completely real. Pain, exhaustion, and fear will be authentic. Death in the simulation results in immediate ejection, but the mental trauma can last for weeks." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in silence. Jake looked around at his fellow crew members. He had been a Marine before joining the Space Force and had more combat experience than most of the others. "On the station? I'll do it," he said. "Jake, this is serious," Rodriguez said. "These aliens have been fighting for thousands of years. They have natural weapons, special abilities, and experience we can't match." "Maybe," Jake said, "but somebody has to try. If we don't participate, we'll never get another chance like this." Dr. Carter was already pulling up files on her computer. "I can help you prepare. We have 3 days to study every piece of information we can find about these alien species. We need to understand their strengths and weaknesses." Engineer Pete Williams joined the discussion. The rules say improvised tools are allowed. That means you can use anything you find in the simulation arena as a weapon. Jake nodded. I've been trained in close combat and survival techniques. I know how to turn everyday objects into weapons. Over the next 3 days, the crew worked around the clock. Amy studied alien biology, looking for weak points in their natural defenses. Pete analyzed the tournament footage, noting what kinds of objects were available in the arenas. Jake trained his body and mind, practicing with improvised weapons and reviewing combat techniques. The night before the tournament, Jake sat alone in his quarters. He thought about his family back on Earth, about the people who would be watching, and hoping for humanity's success. The pressure was enormous. He would be representing not just himself, but his entire species. He picked up his mess kit and looked at the contents. A knife, a fork, and a spoon. Simple tools that every soldier carried. In the simulation, he would only have what he could find or what he brought with him. The rules allowed personal items as long as they weren't weapons. Jake made his decision. He would bring his mess kit into the simulation. Most people would focus on the knife as a weapon, but Jake had different ideas. The spoon was light, versatile, and no one would expect it to be dangerous. Sometimes the best weapon was the one your enemy didn't see coming. The morning of the tournament arrived. Jake put on the neural interface helmet that the aliens had provided. The device would transfer his consciousness into the simulation while his body remained safely on the Aurora. Remember, Dr. Carter said, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for all of humanity. No pressure, Jake said with a smile. Captain Rodriguez placed a hand on his shoulder. We believe in you, Jake. Show them what humans can do. The neural interface activated. Jake felt a strange, tingling sensation as his consciousness was uploaded into the simulation. The last thing he saw was the concerned faces of his crewmates, and the last thing he felt was the weight of his mess kit in his pocket. When Jake opened his eyes, he was standing in a vast arena filled with alien spectators. The noise was incredible. Thousands of different voices creating a cacophony of sound. He could feel their skepticism, their certainty that the human would be eliminated quickly. Jake reached into his pocket and felt the familiar shape of his spoon. He had studied his opponents, learned their strengths and weaknesses, and prepared as best he could. Now it was time to show the galaxy what humanity was made of. The tournament announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all species, welcome to the Grand Combat Simulation. In the first match, we have Zethkar of the Krillian Empire facing Jake Morrison of Earth. Jake looked across the arena at his opponent. Zethkar was 8 feet tall, covered in chitinous armor, and had 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws. The alien warrior looked at Jake with contempt, clearly believing this would be an easy victory. The arena was filled with debris, broken furniture, and various objects that could be used as weapons. Jake gripped his spoon tighter and took a deep breath. The fate of humanity rested in his hands, and he would not let his species down. The announcer's voice rang out again. Let the tournament begin. Jake Morrison stood in the arena and felt the weight of thousands of alien eyes watching him. The crowd was huge, filling every seat in the massive Coliseum. Strange creatures from across the galaxy had come to watch the tournament, and most of them were betting against the human. The arena floor was covered with broken furniture, metal pipes, chunks of concrete, and other debris. Jake could use any of these items as weapons, but first he had to survive long enough to reach them. His opponent, Zethkar, was already moving. The Krillian warrior was terrifying to look at. 8 feet tall with blue-black armor covering his entire body, he looked like a giant insect that had learned to walk on 2 legs. His 4 arms moved independently, each one ending in claws that could slice through steel. When he opened his mouth, Jake could see rows of sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. Zethkar made a sound that the translation system turned into laughter. So this is what humans look like, the alien said. Small, weak, and soft. This will be over quickly. Jake did not respond. He had learned in the Marines that talking during a fight was a waste of energy. Instead, he studied his opponent, looking for weaknesses. The Krillian's armor looked strong, but armor always had joints where pieces connected. Those joints had to be flexible for movement, which meant they were vulnerable. Zethkar charged forward with surprising speed. His forearms spread wide, claws extended, ready to tear Jake apart. The human rolled to the side just as the claws whistled through the air where his head had been. Jake came up behind a broken table and used it as temporary cover, the Krillians. Claws shredded the table like paper. Jake was already moving, grabbing a metal pipe from the debris. He swung it at Zethkar's head, but the pipe bounced off the alien's armor without leaving a scratch. The impact sent vibrations up Jake's arms, telling him that conventional attacks would not work. Zethkar laughed again and swiped at Jake with two arms. The human ducked under the first attack and blocked the second with the pipe. The force of the blow sent Jake sliding backward across the arena floor. He was stronger than most humans, but compared to the Krillian, he was like a child fighting an adult. Jake dropped the useless pipe and reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the familiar shape of his spoon. In the audience, he could hear aliens making sounds that the translator turned into mockery and disbelief. They could not understand why a human would choose an eating utensil as a weapon. Zethkar paused when he saw the spoon. The alien's four eyes blinked in confusion. "What is that supposed to be?" he asked. Jake smiled. "It's a tool." The Krillian warrior shook his head and charged again. This time, Jake did not try to run. He waited until the last second, then dropped to one knee and drove the spoon's handle into the joint where Zethkar's leg connected to his body. The alien's own momentum carried him forward, forcing the improvised weapon deeper into the vulnerable spot. Zethkar screamed in pain and stumbled. The sound was like nothing Jake had ever heard, a mix of insect chittering and mammalian howling. The alien tried to reach the spoon with his four arms, but the angle was wrong. He could not pull it out. Jake did not give him time to recover. He grabbed the spoon and twisted it, using the leverage to force Zethkar off balance. The huge alien crashed to the ground, his armor clattering against the arena floor. Jake rolled away before the flailing claws could catch him. The arena had gone quiet. The alien spectators could not believe what they were seeing. A human, the smallest and weakest-looking competitor in the tournament, had just brought down a Krillian warrior with a piece of eating equipment, but Zethkar was not finished. The alien warrior rolled to his feet, gore leaking from the wound in his leg. His four eyes glowed with rage, and his mandibles clicked together in anger. He was no longer underestimating the human. Jake circled around his opponent, keeping the spoon ready. He had hurt the Krillian, but not badly enough to end the fight. He needed to find another weakness, another opportunity to strike. Zethkar moved more carefully now, favoring his injured leg. He kept his forearms spread wide, ready to block any attack. But Jake had noticed something during their first exchange. The Krillian's armor was designed to protect against slashing and crushing attacks. It was not designed to protect against precision strikes at vulnerable points. Jake feinted to the left, then dove to the right. As Zethkar turned to follow the movement, Jake scraped the spoon against the metal debris on the arena floor. The friction created sparks and sharpened the edges of the utensil. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. The Krillian warrior lunged forward with all four arms, trying to pin Jake against the arena wall. The human dropped to the ground and rolled between the alien's legs. As he passed underneath, Jake drove the sharpened spoon into another joint, this one at the base of Zethkar's spine. The alien's scream was even louder this time. His legs gave out, and he crashed to the ground face first. Jake quickly scrambled on top of the fallen warrior and pressed the spoon against a nerve cluster behind Zethkar's head. It was a spot Dr. Carter had identified during their preparation, a place where even light pressure could cause unconsciousness. Zethkar's eyes rolled back in his head, and his body went limp. The arena announcer's voice boomed across the Coliseum. "Winner of the first match, Jake Morrison of Earth." The crowd erupted in noise. Some aliens cheered, others made sounds of disbelief, and many simply sat in stunned silence. Jake stood up slowly, his legs shaking from adrenaline. He looked down at the bent spoon in his hand and smiled. In the audience, representatives from different alien species were already talking among themselves. The human had done something unprecedented. He had defeated a Krillian warrior using nothing but intelligence, speed, and an improvised weapon. It was not supposed to be possible. Jake walked to the center of the arena and raised his spoon above his head. The crowd's reaction was mixed, but he could see respect in some of the alien faces. They had expected the human to be eliminated quickly. But instead he had proven that Earth's representative was not to be underestimated. As Jake left the arena, he passed by other competitors waiting for their matches. A Nethran fighter with pale blue skin watched him with interest. A massive Vorthan berserker growled low in his throat. They had all seen what the human could do, and they were already planning how to counter his tactics. Jake did not care. He had won his first match and proven that humans belonged in the tournament. The spoon in his hand was no longer just an eating utensil. It was a symbol of human ingenuity, a reminder that sometimes the best weapon was the one nobody expected. Back on the Aurora, Captain Rodriguez and the crew were celebrating. They had watched the match through the Neural Links broadcast system, and they could hardly believe what they had seen. Jake Morrison had taken the first step toward changing humanity's place in the galaxy, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. The next opponent would be ready for him. They would study his tactics and prepare countermeasures. He would have to be even more creative, even more unpredictable. The tournament was far from over, and the real challenges were still ahead. As he prepared for the next match, Jake cleaned his spoon and thought about what he had learned. The aliens in the tournament were strong, fast, and dangerous, but they all had one weakness. They expected their opponents to fight like warriors from their own species. They did not expect improvisation, creativity, or the kind of desperate ingenuity that humans had developed over thousands of years of warfare. Jake Morrison was ready to show them what humanity was really capable of. Jake Morrison had 2 hours to rest between matches. He sat in a small waiting room that the tournament organizers had provided, trying to calm his nerves. His first victory had surprised everyone, including himself. The bent spoon lay on the table beside him, and he could hardly believe that this simple piece of metal had brought down a Krillian warrior. Dr. Carter's voice came through the neural link communication system. Jake, we've been analyzing the footage of your next opponent. Her name is Tisara, and she's from the Nethran species. Jake closed his eyes and listened as Amy described what they had learned. The Nethrans were tall, thin aliens with pale blue skin and large black eyes. They had evolved in low-gravity environments, which made them physically weaker than most species. But they had developed a special ability to compensate for their weakness. She can control gravity around her body, Amy explained. She can make herself heavier to hit harder or lighter to move faster. She can also create gravity fields to crush opponents or throw them around like toys. Pete Williams added his analysis. The next arena is a space station with zero gravity. That's the Nethran's natural environment. She have every advantage. Jake picked up his spoon and examined it. The metal was scratched and bent from the previous fight, but it was still functional. He had learned something important during his battle with Seth Carr. The aliens expected their opponents to fight in predictable ways. They did not expect creativity or unconventional tactics. What else do we know about this space station? Jake asked. Amy's voice came through the link again. It's an old research facility with multiple levels connected by tubes and corridors. There are floating platforms, maintenance equipment, and lots of metal debris. The artificial gravity generators are damaged, so some areas will have normal gravity while others have none. Jake nodded. He had trained in zero-gravity environments during his time in the Space Force. It was disorienting at first, but humans could adapt to it. The question was whether he could adapt faster than his opponent could use her natural advantages. The tournament announcer's voice echoed through the waiting room. Contestants for Match 2, please report to the arena. Jake stood up and put the spoon back in his pocket. He walked through the corridor that led to the arena, passing other competitors who watched him with new respect. Word of his victory had spread quickly, and the other fighters were no longer dismissing the human as an easy target. The arena materialized around him as his consciousness fully entered the simulation. Jake found himself floating in the middle of a damaged space station. Metal platforms drifted slowly through the air, connected by tubes and cables. Emergency lights flashed red, casting eerie shadows across the debris field. Tisara appeared on a platform about 50 feet away. She was even taller than Jake had expected, nearly 7 feet in height but thin as a rail. Her pale blue skin seemed to glow in the emergency lighting, and her large black eyes fixed on him with cold intelligence. "So you are the human who defeated Zethkar," she said. Her voice was soft but carried clearly through the station's communication system. "I watched your match." "You are clever, but cleverness will not help you here." Jake said nothing. He was too busy trying to orient himself in the zero-gravity environment. He pushed off from a nearby wall and drifted toward a collection of metal debris. His movements were clumsy compared to Tisara, who moved through the zero-gravity like she was born to it. The Nethran warrior raised her hand, and Jake felt the gravity around his body suddenly increase. He was pulled down toward the nearest platform with crushing force. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and he struggled to stand under the increased weight. Tisara smiled. "Gravity is my servant, human. I can make you heavy enough to crush your own bones or light enough to float helplessly until you starve." Jake rolled to the side as another gravity wave hit the platform where he had been lying. The metal decking buckled under the force. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his spoon, then looked around for something he could use to even the odds. The space station was full of electronic equipment, much of it damaged and sparking. Jake remembered his training in electromagnetic theory. Gravity manipulation required precise control over energy fields, and those fields could be disrupted by electromagnetic interference. Jake pushed off from the platform and floated toward a cluster of damaged computer terminals. Tisara followed, using her gravity control to propel herself much faster than Jake could manage. She reached out with her power, trying to pin him against a bulkhead, but Jake had been expecting this. He grabbed a handful of loose wires and touched them to his spoon. The metal conducted the electrical current, creating a small but noticeable electromagnetic field. It was not much, but it was enough to disrupt Tisara's concentration for a split second. The Nethran's gravity field wavered, and Jake seized the opportunity. He pushed off from the bulkhead and sailed toward her, using the spoon to reflect light from the emergency beacons into her large, sensitive eyes. Tisara cried out and covered her eyes with her hands. In that moment of blindness, Jake collided with her. The impact sent both of them tumbling through the zero-gravity environment. Jake wrapped his arms around the alien and held on tight. "Let go of me," Tisara screamed. She tried to use her gravity control to throw Jake off, but the electromagnetic interference from the damaged equipment was getting stronger. Her powers were becoming unreliable. Jake used the spoon to access a control panel on the wall. He had no idea what most of the buttons did, but he pressed them anyway. Lights flickered, alarms sounded, and some of the floating platforms began to spin wildly. The chaos worked in Jake's favor. Tisara was used to controlled environments where her powers gave her complete dominance. She did not know how to fight. When everything around her was unpredictable, Jake pushed off from the Nethran and floated toward a maintenance shaft. He used the spoon to pry open an access panel, exposing more electrical systems. The electromagnetic interference was now strong enough to seriously disrupt Tisara's gravity manipulation. The Nethran warrior tried to follow him, but her movements were no longer graceful. Without her powers, she was just a tall, thin alien, trying to fight in zero gravity. Jake, despite his earlier clumsiness, had years of training in space environments. Jake used the spoon to short-circuit a power conduit. Sparks flew everywhere, and the artificial gravity in that section of the station suddenly reversed. Instead of pulling toward the floor, everything was now pushed toward the ceiling. Tisara was caught completely off guard. She had been trying to land on a platform when the gravity field reversed, and she was thrown upward with tremendous force. She slammed into the ceiling and bounced off. Tumbling helplessly through the air, Jake was ready for the gravity reversal. He had positioned himself near a handrail and was able to control his movement when the field changed. He pushed off from the ceiling and sailed toward the stunned Nethrin. The final moment of the fight came when Jake used the spoon to activate an emergency containment field. The energy barrier appeared around Tisara, trapping her in a glowing cage. She pounded on the walls of the field, but there was no escape. Winner of Match 2, Jake Morrison of Earth. The announcer declared. Jake floated in the zero gravity environment, breathing hard. He had won again, but this victory had been even more difficult than the first. Tisara had been a skilled opponent with natural advantages that should have made her unbeatable, but Jake had found a way to neutralize those advantages. He had used the environment against her, turning her own expectations into weaknesses. The electromagnetic interference had been the key, but it was the gravity reversal that had sealed her defeat. As Jake left the arena, he could hear the alien spectators talking among themselves. The human had done something impossible again. He had defeated a Nethrin in zero gravity, using nothing but ingenuity and an eating utensil. The other competitors were watching Jake with new eyes. The Vorthan berserker named Gorvak cracked his knuckles and growled. The Cyclonian champion Zerthal sat in meditation, trying to understand how a primitive human could be so successful. Jake returned to his waiting room and sat down heavily. 2 victories, but the competition was getting harder. His next opponent would be even more dangerous, and they would all be studying his tactics now. He looked at his spoon, now even more battered than before. The simple piece of metal had become his trademark, his symbol of human determination. But Jake knew that the real weapon was not the spoon itself. It was the human ability to adapt, to find solutions where none should exist, and to turn disadvantages into advantages. The tournament was far from over, and the greatest challenges still lay ahead. Jake Morrison had never felt more tired in his life. 2 victories in the tournament had drained him both physically and mentally. He sat in the waiting room between matches, holding his battered spoon and trying to prepare himself for what everyone said was impossible. Dr. Carter's voice came through the neural link, and Jake could hear the worry in her tone. Jake, your next opponent is Gorvak the Destroyer. He's a Vorthan berserker, and his species has never lost a semifinal match in the history of this tournament. Jake closed his eyes and listened as Amy described what they had learned about the Vorthans. They were massive humanoid aliens, standing nearly 10 feet tall and weighing over 1,000 pounds. Their bones were denser than steel, their muscles could generate incredible force, and their skin was thick enough to stop most weapons. But the worst part, Amy continued, is their healing ability. Vorthans can recover from wounds that would kill any other species. Cut them, and they heal in minutes. Break their bones, and they mend in hours. No one has ever found a way to keep a Vorthan down. Pete Williams added his own analysis. The arena for this match is an ancient temple complex. Multiple levels, stone corridors, and lots of places to hide. But hiding won't help you much against someone who can punch through walls. Jake opened his eyes and looked at his spoon. The metal was scratched, dented, and bent from his previous battles. It looked like a piece of junk that someone had pulled out of a garbage bin. But this worthless-looking utensil had already helped him defeat 2 supposedly superior opponents. What else do we know about Vorthan biology? Jake asked. Amy was quiet for a moment. There is one thing. Their enhanced healing and strength require enormous amounts of energy. A Vorthan warrior burns calories at 10 times the rate of a normal humanoid. If you could somehow force Gorvak to exhaust his energy reserves, he would become vulnerable, Jake finished. It was a long shot, but it was the only weakness they had identified. The question was how to tire out a being that could fight for hours without stopping. The tournament announcer's voice echoed through the waiting room. Contestants for the semifinal match, please report to the arena. Jake stood up and walked toward the arena entrance. The corridor was lined with alien spectators who had come to watch what they expected to be his final match. Many of them looked at him with something like pity. The human had fought well, but now he faced an opponent that no amount of cleverness could defeat. The arena materialized around Jake as he entered the simulation. He found himself standing in the ruins of an ancient temple. Massive stone columns reached toward a ceiling lost in shadows. Broken statues and fallen blocks of stone created a maze of obstacles and hiding places. The air smelled of dust and age. Gorvik, the destroyer, stood at the far end of the temple. The Vorthen berserker was even more terrifying than Jake had imagined. Nearly 10 feet tall, with muscles that bulged under scarred gray skin, he looked like a living mountain. His hands were the size of dinner plates, and when he smiled, Jake could see teeth that could bite through steel. "So you are the little human that everyone is talking about," Gorvik said. His voice was deep enough to make the stone floor vibrate. "I have watched your matches. You are clever, but cleverness ends here. I will crush you with my bare hands." Jake did not reply. He was too busy studying the temple architecture. The ancient builders had incorporated all sorts of mechanical devices into the structure. Pressure plates, counterweights, and hidden passages were built into the walls and floors. Most of them were probably broken after thousands of years, but some might still work. Gorvik charged forward like a freight train. His massive feet left cracks in the stone floor with each step. Jake dove behind a fallen column just as the berserker's fist smashed into the stone where he had been standing. The impact sent chunks of rock flying in all directions. Jake rolled to his feet and ran deeper into the temple. Gorvik followed, smashing through obstacles like they were made of paper. A stone column that had stood for millennia crumbled under the berserker's charge. Ancient statues shattered into dust. "You cannot run forever, little human," Gorvik roared. "Face me like a warrior." Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out his spoon. He used it to probe the walls as he ran, looking for hidden switches or pressure points. The ancient builders had been clever, hiding their mechanisms behind decorative carvings and false stones. Behind him, Gorvik was getting frustrated. The Vorthen was incredibly strong, but the temple's layout forced him to navigate carefully around obstacles. His massive size, which was an advantage in open combat, became a liability in the narrow corridors and low passages. Jake found what he was looking for near the temple's central chamber. A section of wall that looked solid but felt hollow when he tapped it with his spoon. He pressed the spoon into a small gap between stones, and something clicked inside the wall. A section of the floor suddenly gave way, revealing a pit filled with ancient cushioning materials. Gorvik, who had been charging toward Jake, barely managed to stop himself at the edge. The berserker looked down into the pit and laughed. "Clever, but not clever enough," Gorvik said. "I will simply go around," but Jake had noticed something else. The temple's central chamber contained a complex arrangement of mirrors and crystal lenses. They were positioned to catch and focus light from the artificial sun that illuminated the arena. It was some kind of ancient lighting system, probably used for ceremonies. Jake used his spoon to adjust one of the mirrors, redirecting a beam of concentrated sunlight. The beam was not powerful enough to hurt Gorvik directly, but it did something else. It raised the temperature in the chamber by several degrees. Gorvik noticed the change immediately. Vorthens were adapted to cold climates, and heat affected them more than other species. The berserker began to sweat, and his movements became slightly less coordinated. Jake adjusted more mirrors, creating a network of focused light beams that filled the chamber with intense heat. Gorvik's healing factor was working overtime to regulate his body temperature, burning through his energy reserves at an accelerated rate. "What are you doing?" Gorvik demanded. He swung his massive fist at Jake, but the human was already moving. The heat was making the berserker slower and less accurate. Jake led Gorvik on a chase through the temple complex, using his spoon to trigger more ancient mechanisms. Walls shifted to block passages, forcing the berserker to smash through them. Ceiling panels dropped, making Gorvik waste energy breaking through obstacles. Floor tiles collapsed, creating new pits and barriers. Each obstacle required Gorvik to use his incredible strength, and each use of that strength burned more of his precious energy. The concentrated heat from the mirror system was making his bodywork even harder to maintain function. After 30 minutes of constant action, Gorvik began to slow down. His breathing became labored and sweat poured down his gray skin. The Berserker's healing factor was still working, but it could not keep up with the constant demands being placed on his system. "Impossible," Gorvik gasped. "No one has ever—" Tired out of Vorthen, Jake used this moment of weakness to spring his final trap. He had been leading Gorvak toward the pit he had discovered earlier, adjusting the floor panels with his spoon as they moved. When the exhausted Berserker stepped on the wrong stone, the entire section of floor gave way. Gorvik fell into the pit with a crash that shook the entire temple. The ancient cushioning materials absorbed most of the impact, but the Berserker was too tired to climb out immediately. Jake quickly used his spoon to jam the mechanism that controlled the floor panels. Trapping Gorvak in the pit, the arena fell silent except for Gorvak's heavy breathing. The mighty Vorthen Berserker, who had never been defeated in combat, lay trapped in a hole by a human with a spoon. Winner of the semifinal match, Jake Morrison of Earth, the announcer declared. The alien audience erupted in chaos. Some species cheered, others argued loudly, and many simply sat in stunned disbelief. A human had defeated a Vorthen Berserker, something that was supposed to be impossible. Jake helped Gorvik out of the pit after the match was officially over. The Berserker looked at him with new respect. "You did not defeat me with strength," Gorvik said. "You defeated me with wisdom. That is more impressive than any physical victory." As Jake left the arena, he knew that he had reached the finals of the tournament. One more victory would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. But his final opponent would be the most dangerous of all, the defending champion who had never lost a single match. Jake looked at his spoon, now so battered that it barely resembled its original shape. But it had brought him this far, and he trusted it to carry him through one final battle. Jake Morrison sat alone in the waiting room before the final match. His hands shook slightly as he held his spoon, now so damaged that it looked like a piece of twisted scrap metal. 3 victories had brought him to this moment, but the final opponent was unlike anything he had faced before. Dr. Carter's voice came through the neural link, and for the first time during the tournament, she sounded genuinely frightened. "Jake, your final opponent is Zerthal the Mindrender. He's a Cyclonian, and his species has dominated this tournament for over 200 years. Jake closed his eyes and tried to calm his racing heart. The Cyclonians were telepathic aliens who could read their opponent's thoughts and predict their actions before they happened. No challenger had ever defeated a Cyclonian in single combat because they always knew what was coming. "Zerthal has won 7 consecutive tournaments," Amy continued. "He can see your plans before you make them, anticipate your moves before you start them, and counter your attacks before you launch them. I don't know how you can fight someone who can read your mind." Pete Williams added his analysis of the final arena. "It's a shifting maze that reconfigures itself every few minutes. The walls move, the floors tilt, and gravity changes direction randomly. It's designed to test pure adaptability rather than planning or strategy." Jake opened his eyes and stared at his battered spoon. Every previous opponent had underestimated him because they judged him by their own standards. But Zerthal would not make that mistake. The Cyclonian knew exactly what Jake was capable of because he could read every thought in the human's mind. "There has to be something," Jake said. "Some way to fight a telepath." Amy was quiet for a long moment. "There might be one possibility. Cyclonian telepathy works by reading electrical patterns in the brain. If you could create enough electromagnetic interference, like I did against the Nethrin," Jake said. "But this time I need something stronger." The tournament announcer's voice echoed through the waiting room. "Contestants for the final match, please report to the arena." Jake stood up and walked toward the arena entrance. The corridor was packed with alien spectators from every species in the galaxy. They had come to witness either the crowning of a new champion or the end of the most unlikely tournament run in history. The arena materialized around Jake as he entered the simulation. He found himself standing in a massive maze with walls that reached high above his head. The surfaces were made of some kind of metal that hummed with electrical energy. Even as he watched, sections of the maze began to move. Reconfiguring the pathways and passages, Zerthal appeared on a platform across the maze from Jake. The Cyclonian was tall and thin, with pale white skin and large purple eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. When he spoke, his voice echoed inside Jake's mind rather than through his ears. "Welcome to your final battle, human," Zerthal said without moving his lips. "I have been watching your progress with great interest. You are more resourceful than most, but resourcefulness cannot overcome absolute knowledge." Jake felt a strange sensation, like someone was shuffling through the contents of his brain. Zerthal was reading his thoughts, examining his memories, and learning everything there was to know about human combat techniques. "Interesting," the Cyclonian continued. "You plan to use electromagnetic interference against my telepathic abilities. A clever idea, but I know about it now, so I can prepare countermeasures." Jake said nothing. He was trying to think of absolutely nothing, but it was impossible to empty his mind completely. Random thoughts and memories kept surfacing, and Zerthal absorbed each one like a computer downloading files. The maze walls shifted again, and Jake began to move. He had no real plan, which was actually an advantage. If he did not know what he was going to do next, then Zerthal could not predict it either. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out his spoon. The metal utensil was so damaged that it barely held together, but it was still functional. He began scraping it against the electrified walls of the maze, creating sparks and small bursts of electromagnetic energy. "That will not work," Zerthal said, appearing suddenly around a corner. "The interference you can generate is too weak to block my abilities." The Cyclonian raised his hand, and Jake felt his body freeze in place. Zerthal was using his telepathic powers to control the human's nervous system, overriding his voluntary muscle control. But Jake had learned something important during his previous battles. The most powerful weapon he possessed was not his spoon, or his training, or his intelligence. It was his humanity itself, specifically the human ability to act on pure instinct without conscious thought. Jake stopped trying to think and started trying to feel. He let his body move based on muscle memory and reflexive responses that operated below the level of conscious awareness. His hand moved the spoon without his brain telling it to do so, guided by thousands of hours of training and conditioning. Zerthal's concentration wavered for just a moment as he tried to read thoughts that were not there. In that instant, Jake's body acted on its own, breaking free from the telepathic control and diving behind a section of moving wall. "Impossible," Zerthal said. "I can read every electrical pattern in your brain. You cannot hide your intentions from me." But Jake was no longer using intentions. He was operating on pure instinct, the kind of unconscious responses that humans had developed over millions of years of evolution. His body knew how to fight even when his mind was not involved in the process. The maze continued to shift around them, and Jake used the changing environment to his advantage. He scraped his spoon against every electrical surface he could find, gradually building up a charge in the metal. The electromagnetic field around the utensil grew stronger with each contact. Zerthal followed, reading Jake's surface thoughts but finding nothing useful. The human's conscious mind was focused on simple tasks like moving forward and avoiding obstacles. The real decision-making was happening at a level that telepathy could not reach. Jake found what he was looking for in the center of the maze, a massive electrical junction where all the power systems connected. The sparks here were bright enough to light up the entire arena, and the electromagnetic field was incredibly strong. Without conscious thought, Jake plunged his spoon into the electrical junction. The metal conducted the energy, creating a feedback loop that sent electromagnetic pulses throughout the entire maze. The interference was so strong that it overloaded the arena's systems and caused the lights to flicker. Zerthal screamed and clutched his head. The electromagnetic storm was like static in his telepathic abilities, making it impossible to read thoughts or predict actions. For the first time in 7 tournaments, the Cyclonian champion was fighting blind. Jake's instincts took over completely. His body moved without conscious direction, using techniques he had learned in the Marines but adapting them in ways that no training manual had ever taught. The spoon became an extension of his nervous system, striking at angles and with timing that followed no logical pattern. The battle became a dance of pure reaction and counter-reaction. Zerthal was stronger and faster than Jake, but without his telepathic advantage, he could not predict the human's movements. Jake fought like humanity had always fought. With desperate creativity and the refusal to accept defeat, the maze continued to shift around them, but Jake used the changes as weapons. He would wait for walls to move, then use his spoon to jam the mechanisms or redirect the force. He turned the arena's own systems against his opponent, creating a chaotic environment where prediction was impossible. The final moment came when Jake realized that the electrical junction he had damaged was causing a cascade failure throughout the maze. The entire structure was becoming unstable, and sections were beginning to collapse. Acting on pure instinct, Jake used his spoon to create a simple catapult mechanism using the maze's own moving components. He launched himself across a gap that should have been impossible to cross. Landing behind Zerthal just as the platform they had been fighting on collapsed, the Cyclonian champion fell with the debris, unconscious from the electromagnetic overload and physical exhaustion. Jake stood alone on a stable section of the maze, his spoon still clutched in his hand. Winner of the Grand Combat Simulation, Jake Morrison of Earth, the announcer declared. The arena erupted in the loudest noise Jake had ever heard. Thousands of alien voices cheered, argued, and celebrated in languages he could not understand. The human had done the impossible. He had defeated the greatest warrior in the galaxy using nothing but instinct, determination, and a piece of eating equipment. As Jake's consciousness returned to the Aurora, he found himself surrounded by his celebrating crewmates. Captain Rodriguez was already receiving messages from dozens of alien species wanting to establish trade relationships with humanity, but Jake barely heard the congratulations. He was thinking about what he had accomplished and what it meant for his species. Humans did not need superior technology or natural advantages to succeed in the galaxy. They needed only their adaptability, their creativity, and their stubborn refusal to give up. The legend of the human spoon warrior spread throughout the galaxy faster than light-speed communication.